Is this working? Yeah. Before we begin the next panel on Jewish collections in non-Jewish libraries, a couple of technical announcements. First of all, after this session, if you have signed up for the trip to Mount Scopus, or if you have...
אני רציתי להתחיל באנגלית, אבל משהו קרה ולשוני נדבקת בגרוני כשאני מדבר אנגלית בירושלים, אז אני מרשה לעצמי בכל זאת לדבר עברית. בסדר? מקווה שיש תרגום. אז אני באמת חושב שיש לנו עכשיו מושב מאוד חשוב, ורק 2 דקות אני רוצה לתאר בפניכם 2 דברים קטנים שקרו לי בחיי. בשנות ה-70 התחלתי ללמוד עברית בלנינגרד מושלגת, בלי מורה, בלי אף בן אדם סביבי שידע לפחות צורת א', והייתי ממש עובד עצות ולא ידעתי מה לעשות. פתאום הסתבר שבספרייה הציבורית של העיר, במחלקה לספרי מזרח, קיים אגף עשיר מלא חוכמת ישראל, שאף אחד לא בא לשם ואף אחד לא משתמש בזה, כולל ספרות חדשה ממדינת ישראל עד למלחמת 6 הימים, הכל. אני הייתי תמיד הקורא היחיד בעולם הקריאה, ואנשי העלייה הצעירים שנאבקו לזכותם להחזיר את העטרה ליושנה וללמוד עברית אף פעם לא באו לשם. ואני הייתי טוען, למה אתם לא מגיעים? הרי יש אולם, שקט, המון ספרים, אני היחיד שם. אמרו לא, אם זה ברשות המדינה, אנחנו לא רוצים את הרעיון הטהור הציוני שלנו לקבל מהם. זה סיפור אחד על האוסף היהודי הגדול בתוך הספרייה הממלכתית. סיפור שני קצר ביותר. עכשיו במוסקבה יש פרשה של ספריית שניירסון, ואני כך או אחרת מעורב בספרייה והוזמנתי לדיון גדול עם כל רבני חב"ד שהגיעו למוסקבה, ואני טענתי בפניהם, אמרתי, אנחנו במאה ה-21, מה זה משנה אם זה ספר בתוך הספרייה הממלכתית או בידיים אחרות, העיקר שיש נגישות לחומר. למה אתם לא באים לעולם הקריאה? הם אמרו לא, כל עוד שהספרים בידי גויים לא ניגע בהם. וככה אנחנו, לפחות במדינה הלא הקצת חולנית שלי, ככה אני מתאר את המצב עם הספריות הייחודיות בתוך הספריות הגדולות. אבל עכשיו אנחנו בכל זאת עוברים לדברים יותר רציניים של ממש, ואני חושב שבאמת לא כדאי לי להציג בפניכם את הנואם שלנו, אמיל שרייבר, שכולם מכירים אותו, אבל דבר אחד אני רוצה לציין. השנה אמיל קיבל תואר של פרופסור, וזה עניין אישי שלו, נשמח לו, אבל אני מקבל את זה אחרת, כי זה לא סתם תואר לפרופסור, זה תואר לפרופסור להיסטוריה של הספר העברי, ובזה הוא נתן אישור ולגיטימציה לכל המחקר שלנו ולכל בעצם העסק שלנו בחיים, ובזה אני באמת רואה הוקרה לכולנו בזה. תודה רבה לך שקיבלת את זה. ועכשיו מתחילים 20 דקות שלך.
Thank you. You humble me. It's not necessarily easy. The yeah was not necessary, Bill. Okay, so I will be, I was asked to speak about Jewish collections in non-Jewish libraries. There's no way for me to deal with all the problems in all the different non-Jewish libraries that do have Jewish collections. But I've been around, and I've tried on the one hand to work from my own experience in the Bibliotheca Rosenthaliana in Amsterdam, which is part of the Amsterdam University Library and which has been part of that library since 1880 already. So we have made some experiences with being a Jewish library in a non-Jewish environment. And on the other hand, I've tried to come up with some more general thoughts on problems that we're dealing with, and also on challenges that our libraries will have. And it's my personal opinion. Please feel free to say that I'm talking nonsense or that I forget this and that, because I'm aware of that. And depending on how you formulate it, I won't feel offended. It's a matter of definition, first of all. We have national libraries that contain Jewish collections. We have university libraries that contain Jewish collections. We have public libraries that contain Jewish collections. We have religious institutions, non-Jewish religious institutions that contain Jewish collections. We have private collections, non-Jewish private collections that contain Jewish collections. And what defines a Jewish collection? That's actually one of the most difficult problems that we are not going to solve right here. In the Rosenthalianer has its own name, has its own position within the world of Jewish libraries. A lot of other libraries have the same position, but it's not true everywhere. And do 20,000 modern books classify as a Jewish collection? I suppose so. Do five very important early printed books or 5 very important medieval manuscripts classify? It's a very small collection, but it might be very significant to what we're doing. So defining collections and defining the presence of Jewish materials in non-Jewish surroundings is not as straightforward as it may seem when we formulated this session. So this is something that we have to be aware of constantly. It's about quality, it's about the antiquity of the books, it's also about the necessity for the institution that owns the particular collection. So it's very difficult to come up with a collection, but I've been trying to work with the idea of larger collections that we know of, and the problems that these collections deal with. But it's interesting. I mean, I think that we should try to define what we're talking about. I mean, we have a project going on here in cooperation with the National Library, which is a guide to Jewish manuscript, to Jewish holdings in European libraries generally. It's a thing that is being sponsored by the Rothschild Foundation. And one of the things that we came across is the fact that many collections that we know own Jewish materials don't even care to answer. I mean, they have important pieces, but apparently they're not interested in being part of such a guidebook, or a guide. Actually, it's not a book; it's a website, of course. So it's also awareness within the institution of the presence of certain Jewish collections, and that's exactly what Shimon said. Awareness of the presence and of the importance of Jewish collections, which can make a Jewish collection into a Jewish collection. And especially in Eastern Europe, there have been many instances of collections that we were simply not aware of, and that were rediscovered and redefined as a result of that as an important Jewish collection. And it's the National Library of Israel that's taken on a great responsibility in trying to get these out into the open, which is something they should be lauded for. If we look at the situation of national libraries, the first national library that I mentioned is the National Library of Israel, because the National Library of Israel is not only a Jewish collection. One of the things that I've learned here during my many visits here and during the many presentations that I got in different capacities on the processes that are going on here, it's a state library. It's a national library with a lot of holdings that would in other libraries not classify as Jewish holdings. It's no coincidence that our leading man today is a curator of Judaica, of the Judaica collection. So there is also a distinction in the National Library of Israel between the more general collections and between the Jewish collections. And so even here we have to deal with the problem of how do we define a Jewish collection. And I would be curious to know from Yoel, from Aviad, from everyone here, from Chagai, how do you approach that? Then there's other larger libraries, the ones that we all know. The Library of Congress, the British Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the National Library of Canada with its own major collection of some 30,000 Hebrew books in Ottawa, the Lowy collection. And there's a lot of others. There's a situation in Eastern Europe that we will hear about because we have too much greater experts here. The Vernadsky Library of Ukraine, the Russian State Library, and we spoke about St. Petersburg and many other Eastern European libraries where there are enormous collections. I was happy enough to be able to visit the Vernadsky Library shortly before all the turmoil, and I was just flabbergasted with the quality of the collections, but also with the difficulties that libraries like the Vernadsky Library and libraries like Iryna's library are facing, and with the different worlds in which curators of such libraries are supposed to take care of their holdings. And that is something that we have to be aware of as well. I mean, and that is our perspective of what is going on in the world of libraries is as a result of the opening up of Eastern Europe has changed completely. But as a result of the slight closing down of Europe, of Eastern Europe, we have a problem as well. We're facing a problem as well, and it's our obligation, I think. And I also know that, again, the National Library of Israel takes responsibility there, the Rothschild Foundation takes responsibility there to be supportive. So that's so much for Eastern Europe, about which I don't know a lot, but we have other experts on the panel. There's collections in university libraries, and there's many Jewish collections in university libraries. And anyone here who's present whom I forgot, I apologize, because I didn't forget, I was just throwing out examples. The American libraries, Harvard, we have Harvard here, we have UPenn, we have UCLA, we have Brandeis, we have Harvard in the room. UCLA, Brandeis, Stanford, George Washington University, again, with its own defined, smaller Jewish collection that now with Brett Hill is probably the only curator who's not here at the moment. Is turning into something, into an independent unity. There is the John Rylands Library in Manchester, which is part of University of Manchester, which has fantastic Hebrew holdings, and these were mostly sleeping. They were sitting there, nobody was using it. They used to have a John Rylands Research Institute, which they now revamped a year ago, and now they're back to working with their Hebrew holdings. And so I was invited to come there 2 weeks ago, and the quality of the Hebrew holdings is known, of course, but the amount of uncatalogued material, even in such a famous collection as the John Rylands Library, is just flabbergasting. And there's a lot of work to do there as well. So it's not that the situation in Western Europe is fantastic. It's not that the situation in the United States is fantastic. It's just different, and we have to be aware of the constant problem of geography when dealing with this. Oxford and the Bodleian libraries, where there's all kinds of, where there's a lot of activity, and where we are happy enough to be able to say that most of the material is being catalogued now and is becoming part, again, justifiably so, it's becoming a core collection again in our field, and that's very important. And they're working on exhibitions, and they're working on digitization, and their fantastic holdings, among the most fantastic holdings in the world, are now reaching us again, and because the library is reaching out, so things are happening there. We have the situation in Amsterdam of the Bibliotheek Rosenthaliana, Frankfurt, the Universitätsbibliothek. I was in Hamburg 2 weeks ago, 1.5 weeks ago, in a conference on the state of research in Hebrew manuscript. They did an exhibition of their Hebrew manuscript holdings, a short exhibition for like 3 weeks. It was mind-blowing. The quality of the Hebrew manuscripts in Hamburg, and we know this. They're published catalogs, but it's never out there. So they've now been publishing a catalog. They've been digitizing a lot of their material. They have very early manuscripts of the Talmud, a beautiful manuscript of the Three Bavot, a couple of other very important early medieval manuscripts, 18th century manuscripts. This is part of the university library, and it's good to see that a university library and that a center for research of manuscripts generally finally starts to acknowledge the importance, or again starts to acknowledge the importance of their Jewish holdings. And there's all the Israeli institutions. Bar Ilan, we spoke about it 2 years ago, and a couple of other Israeli university libraries that do have dedicated Judaica collections, not just research collections supporting their researchers, but also dedicated Judaica collections. And that is also part of our deal. Then, as public libraries, there are Israeli and American public libraries with substantial Jewish collections. I mean, this is the same, so it becomes sort of continuous, but it's very difficult to define, again, how large should the Jewish collection be for a library to acknowledge it as a separate collection. There's European public libraries with Jewish collections. There are provincial libraries, the situation in Germany, where the provincial is the wrong word, but where the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek, it's a huge library, it's an enormous library, it's a very important library. It's not part of a national system, it's part of one phase lower down. It's Bayern, Bavaria. The same is true of Darmstadt, the Hessische Landes- und Hochschulbibliothek. And there are a couple of other instances where we have libraries that work on one level below the national level, but one level higher than the university library level. And I know that the situation in Italy is again, I learned about that a couple of days ago. The situation in Italy is again different, and the way in which the things are organized, certain libraries, as I understood it, are part of a similar process, a similar system that you would have in Germany, and others have a completely different form of organization. So that all different countries have their own ways of dealing with these manuscripts. And then there's Jewish book collections in public archives. I mean, the whole problem of what is an archive and what is a library is here in the room all the time. I mean, we were having a small one-day conference connected with Yerusha in London next week, discussing this very topic. Because we, in our collection, we have 75 Jewish archives, Dutch Jewish archives in the Rosenthaler. Many Jewish libraries, look at the Center for Jewish History in New York, have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of finding aids published for their archival collections. And the Center for Jewish History is not only a library, I mean, it does hold archives as well. But the problem of definition, the other way around. Many Pinkasim, many people would say Pinkas is your typical archival object. Well, the largest collection of Pinkasim that I've seen in the Vernadsky library. It's unbelievable, hundreds and hundreds of Ukrainian Pinkasim that are part of a library. So there again, the problem of definition is very important. It's important for us to realize that in non-Jewish archival collections, we will find library collections, and it also works vice versa, that in non-Jewish archival collections, that in non-Jewish library collection, we will find maybe Jewish archival material. So the situation is very complicated. It's important to realize all these dimensions. Then there's religious institution. We have a representative of the Vatican Library, not your smallest collection and not your least important collection of Hebrew manuscripts. It's part of a non-Jewish institution and not just another institution. And again, it's the full credit to Albert Roth and to the National Library of Israel for opening up and for starting a genuine cooperation between these two institutions, by which we have access to one of the most fantastic collections of Hebrew old printed books and Hebrew manuscripts in the world. We have monastery libraries, especially in Italy, but also in other places. We have all kinds of monastery libraries where we will find Hebrew manuscripts, early Hebrew printed books. There, the big problem that we're dealing with is that we hardly have any access, that they're not necessarily very well cataloged, that we don't know exactly what is going on in all these manuscripts, what they have. But when I visit older manuscripts, older libraries, monastery libraries, there will always be 4 or 5 polyglot Bibles. There will always be a number of Hebrew Bibles to begin with, Christian Hebraism, but also just plain Jewish books which happen to have landed there through the interest of some 17th century or 18th century connoisseur of Jewish literature or lover of Jewish literature. So I have to be aware of that. And then there's the seminary libraries, the religious educational institutions that have collected larger numbers. The best example, but they sold it, was the seminary, what was it called? The Union Theological Seminary on Broadway in New York, which owned a number of fantastic Hebrew manuscripts, which were sold. Sorry?
Opposite of JTS.
Opposite JTS, and between JTS and more opposite Columbia. And and there are other seminary libraries that contain that sort of material. So we have to be aware of the spread, the extent to which Jewish books have spread over the library world, which makes it almost impossible to be all too ambitious about wanting to collect that all together. But I think we should still give it a try. Then there's private collections. There are a number of non-Jewish private collections with substantial Jewish holdings. I'm myself working for too long on a private collection of Jewish fables. This is a collector in Cleveland. He's non-Jewish, John Linseth. He's non-Jewish. He has an enormous collection of Lewis Carroll. He has an enormous collection which he will in the end donate to the British Library. He has an enormous collection of other materials, fable collections, which he will donate to Cornell. And he has 400 Jewish books. It's a collection, 400 Jewish books containing fables. And this is an interesting collection because it was brought together with the theme, with the thematic approach. And the only other collector that I know that does that is Bill Gross. He's in the room now. So Bill is in the room now. So that's a similar problem. Then you have numerous collectors of fine manuscript, people who just collect beautiful books who can have substantial Jewish holdings. Then to take a different level, the library missions is often very hard to formulate separate missions for Jewish collections within large organizational frameworks, to define yourself as a Jewish collection. The Rosenthaler, for example, perspective on digitization, on the quality of metadata, demands of the researchers, is in many ways different from the main organization. And one also has to give to one's organization. One cannot only take, you're part of a larger framework, and you have to give to that framework as well, which is not necessarily what you want to do in many cases. Staffing, we in the Rosenthaler have to share in a pool of catalogers and hope that someone has sufficient knowledge. People should know some Hebrew is often considered enough. Many collections do have a dedicated curator, many others don't. Different competences are involved when hiring, and also in light of audiences, expectations of patrons. The larger library may think that you need a particular person, and we may think that we need another person. That's a problem that we have to deal with all the time. The funding. Basic funding is usually guaranteed, but not always. Additional funding, even for regular acquisitions, may be much harder. The legal status of a Jewish collection as part of a non-Jewish body will make it difficult to do initial fundraising in many cases. We cannot approach Jewish institutions as the Rosenthaler because we're the university, and the university should be able to pay themselves. It's hard to prevent management of libraries, and it's a big deal. To think that Jewish collections can arrange for their own portion of what they call Jewish money, the Jews will take care of their own things, and you can find Jewish funds easily, which is nonsense, but it's what I hear constantly. Then acquisition, the basics are many times covered. They're the same issue with Jewish funding. The prices for Judaica pieces tend to be very high compared to non-Jewish items. Why do you pay 5,000 euros for a 19th century book? Our 19th century books will cost 500. And the technical incompetence or unwillingness of non-Jewish libraries may obstruct acquisition of digital collections. That's something we deal with. I'm not exactly ready. Give me 2 minutes. The cataloging, similar issues regarding technical incompetence, external funding, explaining and justifying the needs may be complicated. Hebrew script, Romanization standard. How much Jewish knowledge should you have in order to be able to catalog a Jewish collection? And creative international cooperations with, for example, the NLI are in our case, particularly unprecedented. And they think, is it necessary to do it like that? The central role of NLI in funding technology, and when we talk about digitization, definition of metadata, is at times counterproductive because our library wants other libraries not to tell them what to do. Our field has its own tradition in digitization. All the beautiful websites that Adon Bahama is putting out are not necessarily up to the bureaucratic standards and technological standards, not the quality, but standards of the larger institutions that we work with. Different funding models, restricted access issues, which are still paramount in Jewish studies, and making the Jewish digital holdings visible and searchable on the general platforms is a thing. The reader services, possible identity issues involved, because we have that's a serious issue in the Rosenthaler. I mean, the fact that we are dealing with a different group of visitors, and the people often find it difficult to deal with them. Inability to read Hebrew by many staffers, and that involves which implies larger involvement of Judaica librarians, and the impossibility to specify the use of Jewish holdings, although there might be a need to justify one's very existence there. These are all things that we deal with. Exhibitions, difficulties in dealing with different narratives because you want to tell a different story. Assessing the possible audiences for exhibitions, unusual cooperations, again, an exhibition. When we did the Brzezinski exhibition in Amsterdam, it was the first exhibition of a private collector of that status. Different approaches to funding and the international importance of what we're doing. Conservation, social media, public relations, constant contact with other experts. Those are actually library processes that in which we benefit from being part of a larger organization, because we don't have to organize our own conservation. We don't have to organize our own dealing with the social media. We don't have to organize our own public relations. And we are in constant contact with other experts, which is really worth a lot, with colleagues who don't work in Jewish studies but know stuff. Identity is the second but last slide. It may be important for Jewish collections to retain identity, but the institution may not be interested in it or may even be against it. That's, for example, what happened in Copenhagen, where we had this fantastic Simonsiana, which is now just part of the Oriental collections and nothing special anymore, because why do we need a special collection for Judaica? We have these books and everybody can use them. It may be downright impossible to choose a Jewish profile within a larger institution. But history has also shown that being part of a larger non-Jewish framework can be of vital importance. Literally, the Rosenthaler was saved, although it was transported to Germany, during the Second World War because it was public possession, because it belonged to the Dutch government and not to the Dutch Jews, or to the city of Amsterdam, actually, in our particular case. And that is true of so many other institutions. The fact that they were part in Europe, the fact that they were part of a non-Jewish organization is the main reason why they survived the war. So there are other considerations as well. So they're not just disadvantages, but Jewish collections in non-Jewish surroundings do have their own set of problems and challenges. There are enormous differences between the US, Israel, and Europe. And building networks is essential to getting this together, to bringing all these people together. But it doesn't seem to be at the top of many priority lists, thinking about coordination of efforts, digitization, standardization, funding. This is what I have to say. Let's see how the others respond.
First time I understood everything. לא, אני אמרתי לו לא לבלוע מילים. תודה רבה לך. עכשיו אנחנו באמת מגיעים למגיבה ראשונה, וזו ספרייה ממלכתית ממדינה שעכשיו במרכז החוויות וההתרגשויות והכאבים שלנו ברוסיה לפחות. ולא, זה לא צחוק, אנחנו באמת, אנשים כמוני ממש כואבים כל יום מה שהולך שם. ודוקטור אירינה סרגייבה, שהיא מנהלת את המחלקה היהודית בגדולה, ובאמת זו מחלקה עשירה ביותר, שכוללת דברים החל מארכיון של אברהם הרקבי, שאפשר לדבר גם על קטעי גניזה מאוד קדומים, וכלה בעזבונו של שלמה אנסקי. זאת אומרת, זה היקף עצום, ואנחנו מאוד מאוד מקווים שזה, ככל שאוקראינה תשולב לאירופה, הספרייה תשולב למערכת הכללית האירופאית. בבקשה, אירינה.
Excuse me, please. I will find mine. Where is my presentation? Ah, okay. Perhaps it will be. No. No, it's not mine. Who will help me? Okay, first, before some people will help me to start my presentation, I want to say thank you for the organized committee of this so large and so important conference here. And this is a large honor for me to take part and to make a presentation about my work and work of my department and my library. And I have to say thank you, Emile. He helped me. First of all, he sent me the structure of this presentation, and today he helped me and say some words about my library before me. No, it's not mine. Okay, we'll start to find it. Okay. What's about our Ukrainian library, National Library of Ukraine, and its special Judaica collection in our library? It's one of the largest collections in the East Europe because we have more than, I hope I will show you some examples. No, something. Excuse me.
National Library, למטה.
No, not mine.
What's it called?
Jerusalem with...
What is the name of it? You can get
Jerusalem 11.
כל אתם מחפשים, אני רוצה לומר שגם הזדמנתי לשם, לספרייה לפני כל המלחמה, וראיתי במו עיניי קטעים של שלמה אבן גבירול מגניזה.
I will find my presentation.
בדיוק השנה אנחנו רצינו ביחד לארגן באוקראינה איזה בית ספר לספרנים עם גישה לאוצרות ייחודיים. אני מאוד מקווה שבעוד הזמן בכל זאת נוכל לקיים את המצווה הזו, נכון אמיל? כן. ייקח עוד שנתיים, אני משל לעצמי, עד שהכל יתפייס שם, יירגע, לא יודע. טוב, זה על חשבון הפסקת הקפה שלנו, אל תדאגו. לא נקצר את הנאום.
Yesterday I gave this presentation.
שתבינו את רמת הידע במדעי היהדות באוקראינה, בתחילת שנות ה-80 הם מצאו ספרים בשפה לא ידועה בלבוב, והתקשרו לאקדמיה למדעים בלנינגרד דאז לשלוח בן אדם לפענח איזו שפה היא. ואני הייתי אז היחיד בעצם בכל האקדמיה שעסק בזה, והגעתי ללבוב וראיתי ספרים מן המאה ה-16 והלאה בעברית שהקהילה היהודית הצליחה להסתיר בפני נאצים במרתף של כנסייה. ועשינו קטלוג והעלינו את זה למעלה, אבל עקרונית זה היה עד כדי כך, אף אחד אפילו לא ידע לזהות את האותיות. היום זה לא השתנה בהרבה בעצם.
Okay, I'm ready. It was a deep book of Vernadsky. I put on the title of this presentation, I put on the Ansky word, this zwischen zwei Welten. It's from the book. Library and Archive, or zwischen drei Welt. Library, Archive and Museum. Don't punish me. Because I know well that the community of librarians and archivists don't like the word museum. But this is our new idea, to make something mixed between the library and archive and museum. Why we spoke about this? First of all, some word about our National Library of Ukraine. It was one of the largest libraries in the world, but not now, because we have some problems with the new books, but all the library collection is more than 15 million items of books, newspapers, manuscripts, and other materials, are documental materials. And we have two buildings, and I want to show you, if you will come to Kyiv, I want to show you the place where our department, Judaica department, are now located on the old building of this library in the center of the city near the State University. We like this building because it's an old one, and we like the place of our department. And if you want to find the reading hall of our department, please take this picture and you will find it. It will be easy for you to find us there.
A lot of readers.
Yes, but Professor Hamrai is there. What about our collection and why I want to speak about mix between library, archive, and museum? Because it's a complex collection. It's not traditional for the library to make this complex in the one department. At the same time, we have Jewish manuscripts. It's more than 8,000 units storage back to the middle of 14. Shimon sometimes said me 13, but I know the 14th century to the middle of 20th century. The very nice collection of Jewish printing books, it's about 70,000 units. From the late of 15th century, we have some paleo types in our collection, and to the beginning of the modern books beginning of the 21st century. Collection of periodicals. It's very nice and very large collection, about 30,000 units, but we say units is one number of one newspaper from the middle of 19th century until now. And the collection of folk music, which dates 1911 in the start of the recording of Jewish music till 1948, when it was interrupted. It was an expedition of Moisei Beregovsky. Some words you see here, I have not a lot of time. You see here the short list about our manuscript collection. It's a Avram Garkavi collection, which is the lovely collection of Simeon, small collection of Sholem Aleichem. It's 35 units, but very nice thing in this collection. The collection of folk music, I told you. The collection of Pinkasim, it's only the 109 items, not hundreds. Pinkasim, which Emile told, some documents of Society of Promotion Education among Russian Jews, and some documents of the Historical Ethnographical Society, editorial portfolio of Jewish World magazine, it's a Russian Jewish periodical edition of the beginning of 20th century, very nice epistolaria collection of the famous persons of Jewish movement and Jewish professionals of that time, and another collection. Among these collection, one of our lovely collection and one of the most important collection is the collection of Pinkasim, but as for me, I'm historian in my education, but as for me, the main interest for me in this collection is the art part of this Pinkasim. The very nice folk pictures, very nice folk artists who decorated this Pinkasim. Large part of this Pinkasim collection, the original of this Pinkasim collection, are from the different regions of Ukraine. It's Volyn, Podolia, Kyiv region, Odessa, and some else, except west part of Ukraine, because this collection was established by the ethnographical expedition of Shimon and came to us. Now I understand this after my research about this collection. I understand that the largest part of this Pinkasim collection came to our library from the collection of ethnographical museum, Jewish ethnographical museum from St. Petersburg in the beginning of 1930s. It's a very nice thing. I like this collection. And about the collection of Jewish folk music, as I know, it's one of the largest of the world collection. The first record in our collection dated 1911, and the last one dated in 1948, I told you, and it was collected by Yuli Engel, Sheminansky, Zinovy Kiselgov, Isaac Lurie, and Moisei Beregovsky. They made this record on the wax cylinders. Now, and also we have a text and the note list of all these documents. You see this now. We have a certificated by UNESCO like a memory of the world. It's a very large honor for us to make this certificate. And now we made all the digital copies of these wax cylinders with the help of our good friends, the Institute of Problem Registration Information. They find the way to make a non-contact copies of wax cylinders. It was very important for us because you know that the contact information, when you take the contact information from the cylinders, it's over. You can't use it, never again. But now we preserve all these cylinders in our collection and start to publish 7 CD discs with this music now, and made a catalog of part of this collection. This is about short information about our printing book collection. It's a European printed houses, Ukrainian printed houses, Hasidic Ukrainian printed houses, and as for me, I like it best of all, is a collection of Soviet Yiddish books for children, with a very nice illustration which were made by the famous artists of avant-garde. We say Ukrainian avant-garde, but all this Ukrainian, most of all this Ukrainian avant-garde has the Jewish last names like Sarah Shore and Elisitsky, a lot of Jewish very famous painters of the beginning of the 20th century work with the Jewish published houses and make an illustration of the children's books. This is our we have a great collection in our library. And some information about Jewish periodicals. It's among the 30,000 items of Jewish periodicals in the different languages, except Jewish languages, different Jewish languages. We have a Latin alphabet printing. It's Germany, English, and French, and another European languages printing Jewish newspapers, and a very nice collection of Russian Jewish Russian Jewish periodicals, is better to say, from the last of 19th and beginnings of 20th century. What is the mission of our library? First of all, it's collecting, like all the libraries in the world. This is the main idea, to collect all the printing and documental materials. And the second, our mission is to preserve it, because our collection have a very, very difficult fate. It was collected in the beginning of 20th century. It was established in 1918, but during the World War II period, it was in Ufand. After this came back to Kiev, and we have, you know, the strongly history in my country, not in my country, but in former Soviet Union. It was closed, all the Jewish organization and all it was closed all the Jewish life, better to say. And our collection has the same fate, and it was stored in the basement floor until 1990, just in 1990, when Ukraine came independent from the Soviet Union. We start to work with this collection, and the preservation of all these nice things is our rule of our library. And the next, our mission is to integrate this collection and to the Ukrainian culture heritage. Our library now start to large work to make it digital and the internet large resource as a Ukrainian, what is a fundamental electronic library, Ukrainian electronic library. And now we start to integrate our collection, first of all, like a Jewish heritage in Ukraine, first of all, and through this part to the Jewish heritage into the world collection. And to the users include, to work with the readers, to work with our users include the researchers who come to us through all the world. What's about cataloging? And now I come back to my idea of library and archive and museum. Because when we start to make this catalog, I'm sorry, this is in Russian language, Ukrainian language and the Russian language, but we start to make this catalog. First, what we ask of our people who work with the electronic catalog, please give us the permission to make a catalog like a museum passport of all the items. Because if we have some book or some documents, we don't need only the information like a typical librarian. This is the author, this is the title, this is a place of print, and that's all. When we make a catalog, we start to use a lot of information. It's a stamps, it's a marginalia, it's a provenance of this item, it's some information, annotation information about author, about print, about the people who works with the art part of this book, about the history of this book or document in the world. And you see this very long information. I hope sometime it will be translated into English. This is another one examples of this work. Okay. And about the digitalizing of our collection, we started from the Pinkasim because we know that the Pinkasim is the most interesting part for the researchers. Here you see the some example of the Pinkasim. If you will take the part of the website of our library and find there this digital library, you will see the full pages of the item of this Pinkas, for example. You will read all these items in the website of our library, but we just start this work and read all the full information about this. And the exhibitions, it's one of the interesting part of our work because we have not just an exhibition in our department. Every time, usually it's one a month, so we make some exhibition about the part of our collection, some topic of our collection, and at the same time we put this exhibition on the website of all our library where you can find it, and you see here the image of books, but this is this is children's books. I told you about these children's books. You will read an information about these books and you will see all the digital copies of these books. It was for the Belis process in Kiev, Belis Trail, and we made an exhibition about Jewish calendars, and this is from our collection. And we have a part of, we have our page in the, this is World Heritage Collection and the Gold Collection of Europe, when we have our page and put on there some information about our department. And we understand well that, first of all, we have not so much readers, not so much users in our department. I know that it's a problem of every library in the world now with the internet. Yes. Oh, okay, thank you. I have no time. If you have some questions or remarks, I will be glad to answer you. Thank you.
בהפסקת קפה. תודה רבה לך. באמת, אנחנו לא צריכים קפה, אני משוכנע שהידע יותר חשוב. תורה עולה על הקמח. בבקשה, המגיבה הבאה, ספריית קונגרס, ספרייה החשובה ביותר. היה לי כבוד לתת הרצאה בספריית קונגרס לפני כמה שנים, הודות לקרן מנפריד ואנה למן, שמוצגת פה על ידי ברברה למן, שתומכת בנו תמיד, ובאמת זו ספרייה שעכשיו...
זה היה כבוד. אני רוצה קודם כל להודות לאמיל על הסקירה המאלפת שלו, ממש נפלאה. אני הכנתי את דבריי באנגלית, כמובן, אבל כנראה שאני נדבקתי מן הגרונית של פרופסור יאקרסון. אז אני אנסה לדבר בעברית, אני אתרגם את עצמי. אני עובדת בספריית הקונגרס כבר 5.5 שנים כבר. זה די הרבה זמן, אבל לא כל כך הרבה זמן שאני לא זוכרת איך הרגשתי באותו יום ראשון בוושינגטון. עמדתי לפני הערימה הענקית הזאת של שיש, של אבן, ואני שאלתי את עצמי, מה עשיתי? אתם מבינים, אני הגעתי לוושינגטון אחרי הרבה מאוד שנים בארץ. הגעתי ישירות מחולות באר שבע, או ליתר דיוק מאוניברסיטת בן גוריון, והייתי רגילה לסביבה יותר אינטימית לספרים בעברית. כלומר, סביבה יותר אורגנית, סביבה יותר טבעית, סביבה בה עברית היא שפת הרחוב, שפת הדיבור, שפת החיים, ולא רק של המדפים. הייתי בטוחה לגמרי אותו יום מר ונמהר שטעיתי טעות גדולה. ספריית הקונגרס זה לנצח לא יהיה מקום, לא בשבילי ובוודאי לא בשביל אוסף של ספרים בעברית. אבל מה לעשות, הנני אני כאן, אז עליתי במדרגות והיו הרבה מדרגות. ונכנסתי פנימה, ועולמי חשך. כי הנה אני עומדת באולם ענקי הזה, כולו שיש וזהב, ועוד שיש ועוד זהב, ואנדרטות בכל מקום. הרגשתי כמו בכנסייה, ואמרתי לעצמי, זה לא יעבוד. אבל לאט לאט, במשך הזמן, לא הרבה זמן, כשהסתכלתי מסביבי ולמדתי על ספריית הקונגרס, אני ראיתי שיש הרבה מאוד מה להעריך, ובעצם הרבה מאוד שריגש אותי באופן מאוד עמוק, וגם גרם לי לחשוב. למשל, אני למדתי שהגרעין של ספריית הקונגרס, הלב שלה, לב ליבה שלה, זה האוסף הזה, של כ6,000 ספרים. ספרים שהם היו לספרייה הפרטית של תומאס ג'פרסון, המדינאי האמריקאי הגדול, ונשיא השלישי של ארצות הברית. עכשיו, קצת היסטוריה. כשג'פרסון מכר את ספרייתו הפרטית לקונגרס בשנת 1814, לא כולם חשבו שזה רעיון מוצלח. הרבה אנשים חכמים אמרו, ספרות, מוזיקה, פילוסופיה, מה פתאום? קונגרס לא צריך את זה, בשביל מה? אבל ג'פרסון ענה לטענה הזאת, בתשובה שהיא כמו הסיסמה היום של ספריית הקונגרס. הוא אמר בעצם, שאין בעצם כל נושא שמחוקק לא יזדקק לו בהזדמנות זו או אחרת. והגישה הזו היא זו שבעצם שיסדה את כל הספרייה הענקית הזאת, שהיא הספרייה הכי גדולה בעולם, אני מבינה, והספרייה עם האוספים הכי מקיפים. דבר שני חשוב שלמדתי, זה היה קשור עם הסביבה הפיזית, כלומר עם הבניין עצמו. זוכרים את כל האנדרטות, הפסלים שראיתי כשנכנסתי לספרייה? הנה המכתב של תומאס ג'פרסון, סליחה. אז דבר שני שאני למדתי, שכל האנדרטות ותמונות שאני ראיתי, הם לא היו לא קדושים מעונים ולא מלאכים מתים, אלא הם היו האנשות וסמלים של ציוויליזציה, של צדק ושל ניהול טוב, ממשלת חוק, של חוכמה. כלומר, תהילים באבן ובשיש לאידיאלים כמו חינוך ואוריינות, סמלים שאיתם, שעם הספר וספרים של עם הספר יכולים לחיות איתם בשלום ובשלווה. הבניין המפואר הזה שמאחסן את ספריית הקונגרס היום נבנה בסוף מאה ה-19. זה היה עידן מאוד אופטימי, עידן לאמריקה הרבה מאוד אמונה עצמית, ואמונה בספרים ובאוריינות כאמצעים כדי ליצור חברה יותר מושלמת. והאמונות אלו הן נחקקות בקירות של הספרייה, הן צבועות בתוך התמונות, הן חרוטות בתוך רצפת השיש, בתוך התקרות, בכל מקום. אז כל הדברים האלו היו מאוד חשובים כדי לתת לי הרגשה שאכן ספריית הקונגרס זה מקום טוב לאוסף יהודי, אוסף של ספרים בעברית. אבל יש עוד דבר אחד שאני למדתי להעריך, וזה בדיוק כמו שרואים בתמונה הזאת, הקרבה בין ספריית הקונגרס והקפיטול של ארצות הברית. וכאן בתמונה רואים את הקפיטול בעד החלון מהקומה השנייה לקראת השקיעה. אתה לא יכול לזוז בספריית הקונגרס בלי לזכור איפה אתה נמצא, ומה הכיפה הלבנה הזו מייצגת. ואני חושבת שזה שנתן לי לבסוף את ההרגשה שהאוסף ההיברק זה לא רק אורח בספריית הקונגרס, אורח נטל אלון, אלא חלק בלתי נפרד ממנה, חלק אינטגרלית. ואם מותר לי להוסיף עוד שתי שורות, תודה רבה. אני הקשבתי אתמול לדובר שלנו אתמול, סליחה, מה היה שמו? מה היה השם של הדובר הראשון שלה? לא, לפני זה. תודה. אני הקשבתי למר בלומברג והתרשמתי עמוקות מדבריו. כי הוא גם כן דיבר על עצם העניין הגיאוגרפי של הספרייה, על המיקום הזה בתוך המעגל החשוב הזה של הכנסת, של בית המשפט העליון והקשרים ביניהם. ואני חושבת שזה כל כך חשוב, אני רוצה להגיד לכם שמניסיוני האישי זה ישפיע לטובה, והספרייה הלאומית שלכם בצל הכנסת תתלונן, ואני חושבת שזה יהיה ממש ברכה בשבילכם. וזהו, תודה רבה.
אנחנו ממשיכים בטיול שלנו בארצות הברית ועוברים מוושינגטון לסטנפורד. בבקשה, כבודו זכרי בקר, בבקשה. ביידיש אני לא יכול לברך אותך, אבל...
Now from the sublime to the ridiculous. I don't have a presentation to show you. Maybe we'll leave that picture up there as an indicator of the difference between a Jewish and a non-Jewish library or something like that. I come to you both as somebody who has worked in Jewish libraries and as somebody who has worked in whatever you want, whatever non-Jewish library means, that's what I'm working in now. I'm a subject specialist in the library at Stanford University, but I'm also, since 2010, the head of the collection development program for the entire library for humanities, social sciences, and special collections and area studies. And that gives me a certain perspective on the position of Jewish studies collections, at least in one idiosyncratic university library in the Western United States. But let me begin perhaps with an anecdote that illustrates some of the difference between a Jewish library, or at least the Jewish library that I was first employed in, and a non-Jewish library, in fact, that very library that you see there on the screen. In the first stage of my career and subsequently, I worked for the National Library of the Yiddish People. That's YIVO. The library in what we called the Vanderbilt YIVO on 86th Street and Fifth Avenue was a very informal place. Eating and drinking was not only allowed, it was almost encouraged. Even smoking. The fellow who retrieved the books from the book stacks had a cigarette dangling from his lips. I assumed that this is what is normal in libraries. And I visited Washington soon after I began working at YIVO in the mid-1970s, and I was taken to, it was lunchtime, taken to a cafeteria, and I brought some food with me into the office of Dr. Lawrence Marwick, and he looked at the food and he looked at me and he said, "This is not permitted here." Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. Another aspect, though, at least in my experience of working in a Jewish library, at least the one that I was working in, I refer to it jokingly as a national library, but in a way it is a kind of national library with a cultural nationalist mission. This is not the mission of the university where I'm working. It's not a national, cultural, religious mission. It's more a utilitarian focus. Stanford, if I were to say how to sum up Stanford University, it's we want to make the world a better place, and we're training engineers and computer scientists to make it a better place, and doctors and lawyers and graduates of our business school. So that's a different perspective, I think, than going forth and thinking that that what we are doing has a very important meaning for us as a people. It's looking at the telescope, looking through the telescope from both ends and seeing different things. Center and periphery, these are very different concepts when you're working in a Jewish library and in a non-Jewish library, but working with Jewish materials in a Jewish library, in a non-Jewish library. In my experience, working in a Jewish institution, everything, these Yiddish children's books that Iryna was talking about, this was the pinnacle, the center, this was everything. In a library like Stanford, these are commodities that one acquires on the art market for horrendous prices, but they fit into some kind of, they have a utilitarian purpose, they fit into some kind of pedagogical program. This is what our mission is. And so in that setting, we always ask ourselves, when we're talking about special collections, how will this be used here at Stanford? Not what is the transcendental value of this material. I'm fortunate, I would say, that by working where I am currently, I'm in a place where Jewish studies is offered both in the university and in the library, an honored position, but it's an honored position but within an utterly peripheral enterprise, the enterprise of the humanities in the 21st century. We heard a little bit yesterday about about the scroll, and one of the scrolls that I employ quite often is the Excel spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, I become aware of a fairly well-endowed Jewish studies collecting program budget amounting to 1.7%, 1/60th of the humanities and social sciences and special collections budget, and 1% of the university library's budget as a whole. But who's counting? This is just the way it is for, this is an indicator of the position of Jewish studies in a major university research library in the western shores of the United States. I had written some notes on this lovely little memento that I'll be taking with me. And most of what I had written down here was really a repetition of what you heard Emile Schrijver say earlier today. But I wanted to say a couple of words about the role of the subject specialist in this era that we're living in at least in the university library setting. Ah, wisdom. That was an accident. A couple of years ago, I attended an American Library Association meeting, and this is one of the things that I'm compelled to do, I'm afraid, in my administrative role. I had a little extra time, so I thought I would sit in on the meeting of the Western European subject specialists. A more depressed group of subject specialists you have never seen, because most of these librarians were people who come from middle-sized academic institutions where in the United States, where the role of the language specialist and language and area specialist is under attack, and where many of these librarians, they have some kind of tenure in their institutions, but they have no way of practicing what their expertise has trained them to be. This is an era, it's an era of, in some ways, dramatic change and transformation, but it's also an era of retrenchment in many academic libraries, at least in the United States and also in Canada. And in some ways, the subject specialist is an endangered species. And yet here I am as one of them. And I'm fortunate to be in a place where last year we were able to hire, we may be one of the last university libraries in the United States to hire on a new position for a German studies librarian. Nobody is doing this anymore, and she's fantastic. Long may this persist. But we heard a little bit about how spaces in libraries are changing, and how with the technological advances that we are living through and will be living through even after we've ceased living, these are turning things inside out and upside down, whether it's a return to the Neolithic period, or whether it's merely a Hegelian dialectic. Things we are in a different place than we were when I was starting out, and I'm in many ways very happily so. I can go on. Please don't say this out. Don't tell anyone. I can go on Wikipedia and I can find out things in a minute that I would have to go. It would have taken me weeks to figure out or find out a decade or 15 years ago. But we're in an era of digital humanities, text and data mining, geographical information systems, and this is changing a lot of how we are going about our business. I don't have to tell you. Meanwhile, though, I have a few. This is somewhat disjointed. What I'm about, the sequence of what I'm about to say. A little bit of discouraging some discouraging thoughts that have come along in this era of transformation. This has to do with Jewish libraries and how, at least outside of Israel, many of these libraries are threatened or even disappearing. About 15, 20 years ago, there was a library in Detroit, the Midrashah Library, that was shuttered. A fabulous library in New York City, also about 15 years ago, the Zionist Archives and Library. An amazing, amazing resource. It was deemed superfluous by its parent organization, and whatever was left of its collections was packed up and brought here, but frankly, you don't need what they had here. They needed it in New York. Here meaning Jerusalem. The American Jewish Committee Library, another fabulous resource, pretty much deemed obsolete by its parent organization. The good news, and maybe I hope I'm not stepping on toes, Arthur, but the Dropsy College collection is now part of the University of Pennsylvania, but would Dropsy College today be a viable enterprise as an independent Jewish institution in the United States? Jews College in London, I'm sorry, that was the sort of the bad news piece, selling off the crown jewels in order to keep the heating and the lights going. But another good or best case scenario is Baltimore Hebrew University being absorbed by a state university, Towson State in Baltimore or outside of Baltimore. So where am I going with this? I think I'd like to leave this on a somewhat more a higher, more happy tone. All of us are doing amazing things in our own little universes, and the possibilities of bringing things together, especially in this digital and online environment, are greater than would have ever been the case before. And I'm grateful to the National Library for bringing us together here to discuss ways of doing that. And I hope that this is something that those of us who work, whether they're Jewish, non-Jewish, or some other species of library, that we will have many fruitful phases and ventures of cooperation in the future. Thank you very much.
תודה רבה לך. עכשיו יש לנו זמן לקושיות, לדיונים, שאלות, תגובות, בבקשה.
חיים גרטנר מיד ושם. בחרתם בצדק לייחד מקום לספריות יהודיות ואוספים לא יהודיים, ונתתם לזה מקום קטן בכנס, אבל בעיניי זה ה-obvious, זה המובן מאליו, כי זה המצב. אם אני לוקח למשל את התחום שאני מעורב בו, שנמצא קצת באופן חורג מהתחום העיקרי שרובכם עוסקים בו, כלומר תולדות השואה או המאה ה-20, המחצית אמצע המאה ה-20, אז יש כמה עשרות ארכיונים או ספריות בעולם שזה המוקד שלהם, אבל בסקר שעשינו עכשיו בפרויקט בינלאומי גדול, שאני מוביל ביחד עם עוד 20 ארגונים אחרים באירופה, בתוך 4 שנים מיפינו 2,000 מוסדות רק באירופה, שבהם יש תיעוד מסיבי על תולדות היהודים בשואה. ואני מעריך שאם נמשיך את זה עוד 4 שנים, נגיע לבערך 10,000 ארגונים כאלה. כלומר, זה ה-obvious, זה המובן מאליו. ולכן הדיון המרתק שהיה פה עכשיו, גרם לי לחשוב שאולי צריך לחשוב בשני כיוונים שאני רוצה להתחלק איתכם. אחד, זה כמו שחלק מכם ככה אמרו, אמנם קראתם לזה libraries, אבל אני חושב יותר שצריך דווקא להשתמש במילה הראשונה של הכותרת, וזה collections, בגלל שבאמת התופעה, אני חושב, נכונה, או האתגר נכון, היום בכל מקום שמחזיק סוג של ידע, בין אם זה ספרייה ובין אם זה ארכיון, ובהרבה מקומות זה, כידוע לכם, מעורב. זה אחד. ודבר שני, זה שאני חושב שדרושה פה איזו חשיבה אסטרטגית, מחוץ לקופסה, משום ש... ופה אני מתייחס לדברים ששמעתי אתמול מארתור, אני חושב שעצם העובדה שצריך לתת access, ואפילו למפות, לעשות מפה של כל מה שיש, גם זה obvious היום, זה מובן מאליו. לא במקרה ירושה, פרויקט ירושה הוא, השלב הראשון שלו זה שלב של מיפוי, ולא במקרה מה שעשה הארכיון המרכזי לתולדות העם היהודי במשך שנים רבות, היה מיפוי. אז המיפוי זה ברור, אבל אם באמת רוצים להגיע לפתרונות לאתגרים שעלו כאן, צריך לחשוב אחרת. אני שוב אזרוק שני כיוונים למחשבה, שניהם לקוחים מהפרויקט שאנחנו מעורבים בו. אחד, זה ההבנה שצריך לעשות משהו שהוא רב-רבדי, שיש בו הרבה רבדים, ושלא מתחרים בו על הדבר הרגיל שכל אחד מהארגונים עושה, ושצריך גם ללמד בו את האנשים ואת הארגונים לא להיות פטרוניים. יד ושם נחשב, במידה רבה של צדק, כארגון גדול, אולי אפילו פטרוני. כי אנחנו באמת מעתיקים, מצלמים את כל המסמכים בעולם שקשורים לשואה למקום אחד. אבל אם אנחנו באמת רוצים לעשות סוג של שיתוף פעולה עם ארגונים אחרים, הבנו שבמקביל לזה אנחנו צריכים להיות פחות פטרוניים, וצריכים לעבוד באמת בצוות, לא רק עם גוף מוביל אחד. וזה מה שאנחנו באמת מנסים לעשות. הפתרונות הטכנולוגיים שנגזרים מזה גם הם שונים היום. אז גם פה אני חושב שצריך לחשוב בכיוון כזה. והכיוון השני, בהקשר הזה של תוכנית אסטרטגית, זה לא לחשוב רק על איך מחברים את האוספים, אלא גם איך מחברים את בעלי האוספים. הכנס הזה הוא באמת דוגמה נהדרת, אבל הוא לא מספיק. משום שבדרך כלל, שוב, למדנו את זה מהפרויקט הקטן שלנו, המונע המרכזי זה המחשבה של העובדים שלנו. זאת אומרת, התרבות המאוד סגורה, והאופן שבו הם היו רגילים לעבוד כל השנים, ובמשך הרבה מאוד זמן צריך היה לעבוד איתם על, אז גם פה אני חושב שצריך לחשוב על זה, וגם החיבור בין תוכן לטכנולוגיה, גם לא בנפרד אלא ביחד. אלה שני הרהוריי, תודה.
תודה. תן בבקשה מיקרופון לפרופסור חגי בן שמאי.
תודה רבה, באמת דיון מעניין מאוד של אמיל והמגיבים. כמה הערות קטנות. יש הבחנה בין ספריות לארכיונים, ואנחנו רואים שההבחנה הזאת בעצם מטשטשת והולכת עם הזמן. זה כולל גם את הספרייה הלאומית, בזכות השכן שלי, הארכיון המרכזי לתולדות העם היהודי, שקליטתו בספרייה הלאומית מגדילה מאוד מאוד את המרכיב הארכיוני של הספרייה. כך שבעצם לפחות חלק מהספריות או האוספים היהודיים הם באמת מין תערובת, ומצד אחר הארכיון המדינה של מדינת ישראל הוא באמת דבר שונה מאוד מאוד. אנחנו עוסקים בעיקר בארכיונים שהם חיים מצד אחד, אבל לא ארכיונים סגורים, יש גם סגורים, אבל מצד שני אנחנו עוסקים בארכיונים שהם משמרים חומר שהוא איננו חומר מסוג ארכיון המדינה. אני חושב שגם בארצות הברית יש הבחנה מאוד ברורה בין ה-National Archives ל-Library of Congress. וגם הייתי מזכיר אוספים ייחודיים שלא היו כלולים, אמיל באמת נתן רשימה ענקית של סוגים ומיין את הכל, אז יש מוסדות שהם מעין מוסדות בזכות עצמם, בשם עצמם שלא תלויים באיש, כגון Center of Yiddish Book, שזה דבר ענק, באמהרסט מסצ'וסטס, מוסד חשוב מאוד, וגם מוסדות כאלה מתפתחים שהם בסביבה יהודית לגמרי, כי אין להם, הם לא בתוך שום דבר שהוא לא יהודי, הם עומדים בזכות עצמם. לבסוף, הדבר החשוב ביותר, אני חושב באמת, שאנחנו צריכים לצאת מפה, זה יפה מאוד, זה מלמד הרבה, זה חשוב מאוד שאנחנו מתכנסים כבר פעם שנייה ומקווים לשמור על המסורת הזאת. יחד עם זה, אני חושב שצריך באמת לחשוב, אולי מחר תהיה לי הזדמנות לדבר קצת יותר על זה, אבל מאחר שאמיל הזכיר בעיה אחת מסוימת שגרמה לי לחשוב שצריכים לצאת מפה באמת עם החלטות או הצעות ושיתופי פעולה מעשיים לא רק באיסוף חומר אלא גם בעבודה. והדבר שאמיל הזכיר היה העניין של הקטלוג, הוא עיקר העניין של מה שנקרא באנגלית romanization, התעתיק מעברית לשפות אחרות. יש לנו אי הסכמה בעניין הזה, אנחנו חושבים אחרת, לא רק לגבי עברית, בכלל לגבי שפות זרות, אנחנו מקטלגים באותיות קיריליות, באותיות ערביות. אני לא יודע, אנחנו אי פעם קטלגנו בסנסקריט, אוסף הסנסקריט שלנו פחות או יותר נמצא עכשיו כולו בהר הצופים, אבל העיקרון, ויש לנו בעניין הזה חילוקי דעות, אני לא כל כך בקיא במצב באירופה, אני חושב ששם זה מין שיטה מורבת, בארצות הברית אני יודע שמקפידים על תעתיק, לדעתנו התעתיק יוצר בעיות, אבל בסך הכל אני חושב שצריך לצאת מפה עם תוכנית לשיתוף פעולה. לא הייתי אומר שכדאי להקים ועדה, לפחות בארץ המילה ועדה בשנים האחרונות הפכה למילה נרדפת לקבר. אז אולי כדאי לומר קבוצת עבודה, שלפחות בהתחלה תדון באופן תיאורטי, לא צריכים להתכנס באופן פיזי, יש מספיק דרכים אלקטרוניות לקיים דיונים גם כן מעבר לאוקיינוס, במרחקים של עשרות אלפי קילומטרים. ואני חושב ששוב, אני מקווה להרחיב קצת מחר על הנושא הזה, אבל אני חושב שבאמת העניין הזה של החלטות, הצעות, יוזמות לשיתוף פעולה שיצאו מהכינוסים האלה באמת יהפכו את ההתארגנות הזאת שלנו למשהו חי שנושא פירות.
תודה רבה לך.
Thank you. I'm asking myself, I'm from Argentina, from a documentation center on AMIA, Central Jewish Organization, and I'm hearing a lot about Europe and the United States, and hearing that Zachary telling us that so many places diminishing their Jewish interest in Jewish collections, and Europe growing in recognizing if there's some sociological reason that might be thought behind that. Maybe you, Emile, you have thought about the history of the book. But on the other, just only as a question, I'm a sociologist, sometimes this comes back. But we have never heard here about Latin America. Latin America exists. We are the continent.
You're proving that right now.
Yeah, we are the continent where those Jews, where you were mentioning these Ukrainian names, we heard them, we studied them, we read them, we translated them. We have history with them. The immigrants that came brought with them. They came with them in their minds, with all not only from Europe, of course, other countries where they came. And we have created their history and cultural property and creativity. And while I was hearing you, I was asking myself, what have we done with the National Library in Argentina? There are books there. Should we work on behalf to have them more? Should we think on behalf if everything is diminishing? Well, whatever they have, and it's not worldwide. I think that we have to think, including these new scenarios, these new places, because what's happening to you may be different, but not so much. On the other side, I very much support all these suggestions to have from here a more fluid way of relating among us, because also what one can learn from one and from the other, but also what we can build together in knowledge of in a first steps of knowledge of what we have, what are our main issues, what subjects are we dealing are important for us. Many Hebrew medieval manuscripts is an important thing, but not for Jews in Argentina to learn. Maybe there's, but there are others. What emigration meant, what means to live now in a society where Jewish things are part of their being. It's not only those that feel that I'm only Jewish, I don't care with what's happening around me, or they are more, I am a Jewish Argentinian caring for both things. And on that behalf, what is my Jewish ingredient, my Jewish part of that being that might be important for me and for others. So these are questions that I add to this discussion.
Thank you very much. No objections. Okay, no, to Arthur, please.
I just want to pick up on two things that have come up in this session. One of them from Iryna about what I think is one of the words that remains undefined in this conference, which is the word curator. I was recently having a meal with some curators. One of them was from an art museum. One of them was from an archive. One of them was from a library, university library, and we're all called curators. And I was so struck by that, the blurring of the categories of what a curator is something that I think we should talk about, because as Emile was saying, you find these different kinds of collections in different kinds of institutions, and so there's a lot of blurring of categories, which in many ways I think is a good thing, that they're not these neat little boxes. So I want to thank you for pointing that out, and maybe if you want to talk more about this there. The second thing, though, I want to pick up on from Zachary and also from what Chaim was just saying, which is the role of private collectors using technology to access materials that are in different places. And I think that we need to think about how technology enables us to work with private collectors who sometimes can do a better job of collecting and caring for things than we often can because of various staffing or resources. So I think new technology creates new opportunities for partnerships with private collectors. They can retain ownership, but provide access as long as there's a common sense of purpose. And I think it's something that we really also need to think about as curators and as people that care about collections, the role and the relationship between our public purposes and private collectors. I think it's something that also might be addressed here.
Thank you very much. No, please. I want Emile to finish our session and summarize all the things, and the continuation will be in cafe.
See if I can deal with that pressure. Your question, that's an interesting thing with the sociology. I think the situation in different continents, including South America, the reason why I don't mention it is because I don't know it. And that has a lot to say about the situation that we're in. And it's an affirmation of the idea that we should get together twice a year here and be in touch all the time for the rest of the time. And it's very important that we continue doing that. So I agree with that. It's all about being informed, and it's about the point that I made yesterday, that there's so much going on at the same time that we need some sort of coordination of what we're doing and centralization of all the information that we have. I think that is the most important thing. There is an enormous difference between the problems that the Jewish collections are facing, and I think that really some of it is geographical. The situation in Europe with Jewish collection being taken care of in more than half of the cases by non-Jewish curators, the part of libraries, the situation in the U.S. where there is a relatively strong Jewish studies component, but where humanities are in trouble, these Jewish collections may well be in trouble also right now already, and certainly in the future. And the situation in Israel, where at last the National Library, since the last 5 years, has been taken over, I would say almost control, and justifiably so, taking over control of what is going on in the world, not only of Israeli libraries, but of Jewish libraries. I think that we're in the midst of this, and my last remark was Zach's last remarks, and was Hagai's last remark. It is in a way also Chaim's last remark. We have to join, we have to be open-minded about cooperation with our institutions, and as I understood you, also with the public. Not only with private collectors, I think, but also with the public in a way where actually Yad Vashem is showing us how to do that. Be open-minded to the audiences, get your material out there, and give an opportunity not only to our small community of researchers, but also to the larger community of people who actually justify and valorize our existence in this world. And I think it's also vital for the larger future of our field. I can't be more visionary than this, I'm afraid.
תודה רבה לכולכם.